The ugliest purchase. Hello, and welcome to the moment that changed my life. I know what you're thinking right now. Is this a joke? Is this the thumbnail? No. This right here is the $500 monstrosity I brought home exactly 1 year ago, a 1989 Ford Ranger. It looked like a museum piece, but the museum was the Museum of Broken Dreams. The paint was peeling, the engine coughed like a chain smoker, and the rust had its own zip code. The hook, laughter, and the promise. But here's the kicker. When I parked it in my driveway, my neighbors didn't just look, they laughed. They pointed. They came over just to offer their pity. But what they didn't know was that this ugly old wreck was about to turn into a $20,000 profit. This isn't just a car flip story. This is a lesson in seeing value where everyone else sees junk. Stick around, because the real secret to this profit isn't the wrench, it's the mindset. Chapter 1. The Purchase and the Mockery. I found it on an obscure Craigslist ad. The title read, "Truck Runs." That was an ambitious claim. But the price? $500. $500 is the price of a mid-range smartphone. It was the lowest possible barrier to entry. I knew, financially, I couldn't lose much. My worst-case scenario was scrapping it for $300. My best case? Something spectacular. The day I hauled it home, the air was thick with the smell of old oil and impending doom. That's when Mr. Johnson from across the street strolled over, a classic retiree, meticulously mowing his lawn. He took one long, slow look at the Ranger, shook his head, and said, "Son, that's not a project. That's a mistake. You just bought yourself a tetanus shot." His laughter and the silent judgment from the other neighbors was the fuel I didn't know I needed. They saw a depreciating asset. I saw potential for a story. And more importantly, a classic American workhorse waiting to be reborn. I wasn't just fixing a truck. I was fighting a perception. My whole thesis was simple. If a product is cheap enough, its potential value becomes almost infinite. Chapter 2. The Core Restoration. Engine and Interior. The first phase was purely mechanical, no cosmetics. I set a budget of $3,000 for parts and materials, and I was going to do 90% of the labor myself. This is the first rule of flipping. Your time is free, your outsourced labor is expensive. The major headache was the engine. The old 2.3-liter four-cylinder was barely hanging on. I did a full tune-up, replaced the timing belt, water pump, and flushed the cooling system. Total parts cost about $1,500. It took me 3 solid weekends. I was covered in grease, often cursing, and spending more time watching YouTube mechanics than actual TV. The moment it finally started without that horrendous coughing, that was the first major victory. Next, the interior. The seats were torn, the floor was stained. I stripped it down to the metal, installed a simple, cost-effective rubber mat instead of expensive carpet, and found high-quality, period-correct seat covers online for only $200. I wanted it rugged and simple, not luxurious. The goal was to preserve the authenticity, which is what collectors love. My total cost after Phase 1, around $2,500. Now for the looks. I didn't want a glossy showroom finish. I decided on a matte, military green look. It hides imperfections, looks tough, and, crucially, is much cheaper and easier to apply in a home garage. A cheap paint sprayer and quality primer cost me another $800. The truck suddenly looked intentional, no longer a wreck, but a survivor. But every great flip has a moment of crisis. Halfway through the paint job, the transmission started slipping badly, and I almost quit. My $500 truck was suddenly demanding more money and effort than a down payment on a new car. I sat in the garage frustrated. I thought about Mr. Johnson's words. It made me realize the difference between a successful flipper and a quitter. A successful flipper doesn't get frustrated by problems, they get excited by the challenge. I outsourced the transmission fix, my only major labor cost, for $1,200. My total investment was now at $4,500. Still low, but the pressure was on. Chapter 4. The Marketing Strategy. Now for the fun part, selling. You don't sell a truck, you sell a story. My listing wasn't focused on horsepower or mileage, it was focused on the experience. The title? 1989 Ford Ranger, Authentic American Survivor, ready for its next story. The description? I wrote about the journey, the $500 start, the sweat, the grease, the battle against the rust. I highlighted the simplicity, the low maintenance, and the classic patina. I positioned it not as transportation, but as a hobby vehicle, a weekend warrior, a piece of nostalgia. The photos? Key to the marketing. I staged the photos against a rustic barn with a toolbox in the bed, emphasizing its utility and toughness. Good lighting, wide shots, and close-ups of the good parts, like the newly covered seats and the matte paint finish. I listed it on Bring a Trailer and specialty collector forums, not just local classifieds. I set the price initially at $15,000, hoping to start a bidding war. Chapter 5. The Shocking Payday. The bids started coming in fast, and the comment section was electric. People loved the color, the honesty of the restoration, and the story. They weren't just buying a truck, they were buying the spirit of the project. After a week of intense bidding, the final price came in at $20,500. I was speechless. I had spent $4,500 total, which included the purchase price. My pure profit was exactly $16,000. The transaction was seamless, but the real payoff came later that day. I was washing my hands, and I saw Mr. Johnson across the street. He hesitated, then walked over. "It went for over 20 grand, sir. Paid for by a collector in Texas." The look on his face was worth more than the $20,000. It wasn't envy, it was genuine shock. He finally realized he wasn't laughing at a project, he was laughing at a masterclass in value creation. Conclusion: the real lesson and the dream. So what did I really flip? It wasn't the truck, I flipped my perspective. The problem wasn't the rust or the coughing engine. The problem was everyone's limited view of what's possible. They focused on the defect. I focused on the demand. Hey, if this story about unlocking hidden potential resonated with you, and you want to see more content on smart ways to build income and flip assets, don't just watch. Hit that subscribe button right now. Help us build a community of people who look past the surface and see the real value underneath. Now, back to the story. With that $16,000 profit, I did something I'd wanted to do for a decade. I put a massive down payment on a tiny piece of land up in the mountains. Not a mansion, not a fancy car, but a simple place to build a small cabin. It wasn't about the money. It was about the freedom that money bought, the freedom to create my own space, earned from a piece of junk that everyone else laughed at. The real lesson? Stop asking for approval, start looking for undervalued assets. The next great opportunity is often the one everyone else is too afraid or too blind to touch. What is the ugly truck in your life right now? The skill you think is useless? The old idea you're afraid to try? It might just be your $20,000 sitting there, waiting for you to see the potential.